So we were talking about Mary Hartman, and you were about to explain that where the title came from, that Norman came up with the title.
He did, and that was, that became like the beginning of the show, where Mary Hartman. This was another example of, it was a hit right away. It was on the cover of Newsweek the second week that it was out. And I mean, I was surprised, because in most places, after we went to all the networks, Norman didn't give it up. He just decided to syndicate it. And it was the first syndicated, original syndicated show ever. And it was on opposite the news in most places, because it was on 11 o'clock at night. I never expected it to be what it was.
So when you were creating it with him, did you think it had the potential to be something unique and different?
Well, I knew that he, what he did was so successful that I trusted him, and I also knew that it was interesting. I did, but it's you just never know how it's going to be received ever. It can be very surprising.
Where did the name Mary Hartman come from?
Me, I don't know. I really don't know. When people decide to name their babies, and of course everybody decides to name their babies, and they're thinking of names, I think I've named 500 people in my career. What's the big deal? It's like you're constantly naming characters. And I don't know where it came from, but it sounded right. Sometimes it just comes to you.
You said there were 3 other people that were brought in. Can you tell us who they were?
I didn't work with them, so I can't. Anne, one of them was experienced in soap operas. And of course, I think that came in handy. Now, by the time it was on, I was working on something else. I was not there on a day-to-day basis.
And that was
just
because,
there at the beginning.
That was because you were working on something else?
Yes.
And what made the show so unique? Why did it stand out?
First of all, there was never that type of funny soap opera, or at least had, and again, it wasn't broad or outrageous. It was it was tiny. The little things, her husband's having an affair, and I did not have the next door neighbors, but that was good too. I mean, it was, she was going to be a big singer, and then she gets on television, and she says something about, I think it was something about like a Jewish person. She said, "What killed our Lord?" And that was the end of her career. It was so great. And dying in the chicken soup. It's just a gem. And they took it off after 2 years. And I think that was good. It never had a chance to go downhill and be, have these series that are really good at the beginning and everybody loves them, and they can be really good for a long time, and then the ratings start dropping and maybe part of the cast is no longer there. This just never got a chance to, sour in any sort of way. Of course, it was on 5 nights a week, so the amount of episodes is a tremendous amount of episodes.
So ultimately, you were pleased with how it turned out?
I loved it.
So you another show you did in 1977 was called 3 Girls 3. Tell us your memory of working on that show.
That was with Kenny, and the premise of that show was, and they're doing it again, I don't know, they're still doing it now, being backstage with 3 actresses who had never been on television before. We wanted them to be, virgins to television. And watching the on stage and backstage. of these three girls and young women. And it was very well received. It got great reviews. And it was supposed to be 4 episodes, and that's what it ended up. Now, it could have been more. I don't remember who was the head of NBC at the time, but he didn't like it at all. He didn't like it, and so it was never picked up for anything more. But Mimi Kennedy went on to have a really good career. Debbie Allen went on to have a really good career. Ellen Foley, she was successful in the music business and whatever, and whatever. She was successful in the music business, and they were adorable. They were really cute.
In 1979, you wrote a feature film called The Main Event. Tell us your memory of that experience.
There's a fantasy for you. Barbra Streisand is doing your movie. So I wrote it with Andrew Smith, and he was a boxer. I mean, he was a comedy writer, so there's a Band-Aid. He trained as a boxer, and his name was Kid Natural. So he brought the boxing element to it, and we wrote the script, and I think we wrote it for somebody. Yes, we did. We wrote it for MGM. And then it was sort of dead in the water, like a lot of films. This is what happens. It's all about turnaround in this business, where your script gets turned around to somebody else. And it was maybe at least a year and a half later that I had Sandy Gallen as my manager, and he showed it to John Peters, who was living with Barbra Streisand at the time, and also working in her company. Was producing with her. And he would hate me to say working in her company, because he would Anyway, so I said to my agent, who was Jeff Berg at the time at ICM, that script, The Main Event, has been hanging out in John Peters' office. I think we should get it back, because I hate when my scripts are in people's offices, because when you go in, you see stacks of scripts and their titles on the side, and that maybe they're thinking about them, maybe not, maybe somebody is reading them, but I don't like them hanging around. And Jeff Berg, my agent, was a man of very few words, and he said, "Doing it." And I said, "What?" He said, "Okay."
Okay.
All right, so as I was saying, Jeff Berg, my agent, said to me, "Doing it." And I said, "Doing what?" He said, "They're doing the movie." So doing the movie. That was the most words that I had ever heard him say. And that's how I found out, by inquiring where the script was, that Barbra Streisand, who I always wrote for, whatever I was writing, I had her in mind, was doing this movie. Now, I was frightened of her. I had met her once, not really met her. I was at a small party with her once, and I was scared. She was so big. She wasn't scary. She was perfectly nice, but I was very shy about it. And in comedy films, very often, the minute they buy it, they think that the original writers can't do anymore. And so you're off the film, which I was immediately, and somebody else was on it. And I had rented a house in Malibu Colony, and I was walking down the beach, and it was it was sort of a gray day. We were the only other person on the beach was Barbra Streisand in front of her house. And I don't speak to anybody. I mean, I just very shy about that. I wouldn't be in the business if it weren't for Kenny pushing into an agent's office. So I said, all right, I really forced myself. You have to do this. And I was in love with my co-writer, so that's probably why I did it. I went over to her and I said, it's not a movie about boxing. It's a 10-round fight between a man and a woman. And she said, oh, yeah? And she said, we can't afford you. That was the next sentence out of her mouth. And I said, the jewelry you're wearing on the beach alone could pay for it. And that was not my line. You remember I said that was Joan Rivers' line. And the next day we were back on the film. So that's how it got started. And then it was a fantasy because it was a big movie with a big budget. We went up to Big Bear to shoot some scenes, and my kids, this is how I knew that my kids were a little bit Hollywood. They thought the studio put the lake in. And I thought, oh my God, am I in trouble? They both went to MIT, so I'm safe now. But then I thought, these kids think the studios put lakes in. But we were on the set all the time, and we were rewriting as it went on. And I think we spent a year together, and I'm talking about me and Barbara. And it was really fun. It was really fun. She had the ranch then, and actually my kids were out there once, and my mother-in-law at the time said, what do they raise on the ranch? And my older son said, houses, which was exactly true. She had a house, she had a deco house, and there were times when we drove up the coast, and Barbara and I were lying on a mattress in the back of a pickup truck and looking at the stars. It was very, very magical. And a lot of people ask what it was like to work with her, and she is a perfectionist.
Okay, so what was it like to work with her?
Barbara's a perfectionist, and she really does want things exactly right. I mean, I remember the first day of dailies, she was saying, my eyes are blue. They're not blue on the screen. I mean, she notices or they're not as blue on the screen. She notices every detail. She's very detail-oriented. But she was not difficult. I mean, she was a girl from Brooklyn. And as long as you knew that, she was always going to be, look for it to be exactly right, I did not have a difficult time with her at all. Never, not for 1 second. And there it was, a big, big Hollywood production. And when we previewed in San Diego so that nobody from Hollywood could just drop in. But she said, that it's going to be successful, but we're not going to get great reviews. And that turned out to be true. It didn't have great reviews, but I like it. I really do. We went back and redid a scene or two afterwards. I mean, that was the advantage of working with Barbra Streisand, is that there was money there in the production. And it was, it was lucky. A lot of my career is very, very lucky. And that was one of the highlights, really.
In 1984, you created the TV series Finder of Lost Loves. Tell us your memory of working on that show.
This is how I created Finder of Lost Loves. I was on a plane. There was a People magazine, and there was an article about this man who did this for a living. He was a detective who found people's lost loves, as opposed to, being the detective who in a crime type of atmosphere. And those were the days where you could sell things on one sentence. It really doesn't happen anymore, unless you're very, very successful. I mean, if you've created Mad Men, I'm sure you can. But I told my agent about it, and I guess I went in and pitched it to ABC, it was. And they liked the idea. I had never, every time I tried something new, I was successful at it. So this was an hour. And again, I didn't work on the staff, but I set the characters and whatever, but I had never worked on an hour drama before. And I was living on Mandeville Canyon at the time, and I always played tennis at the high school, the junior high actually, down the street. And there was a movie shooting. So I went to look and see what was going on. And it was Finder of Lost Loves. I mean, that's, so I wasn't that close to it. But, I knew it was a good concept.
In 1984, you wrote a few episodes of Amazing Stories with your son, Kevin.
Yes.
So tell us about working on that show.
You get a call, and it's Steven. I had met him, but it's Steven Spielberg. Nobody, has introduced him on the phone or anything, but he said, I'm doing a show called Amazing Stories, and here's his energy behind it. He said, do you know, more people will, even if it's a flop, more people will see it than have ever seen E.T. And so he was really excited about it. And Kevin was getting older with my son, and we talked about it, and we came up with a few ideas. And I went in, and we was on the Universal lot. We went in and told Mr. Spielberg an idea for the show, because he was really committed to me doing it. And I like it. It's fabulous. And so we spent about an hour talking about it, whatever. And we left, and he said, yeah, do it. And I said to Kevin, well, isn't that great that, Steven Spielberg liked it? And Kevin went, oh, that was Steven Spielberg? So fortunately, maybe at the time, he had no idea who it was, and he was very relaxed and pitching very well. And Steven did not interfere with these scripts. He just let them happen. And that was a nice thing. Again, it was something that I had never done before. And I always liked to try things new. That's where the novel came in.
Do you remember what the two scripts were?
One was called Guilt Trip, and it had to do, one was called Hell to Pay. Now, Hell to Pay, I swear somebody on The Simpsons stole that episode, because they do it every Halloween. They show it. It's about a toupee that has a life of its own, and how the toupee itself is a hell to pay. Actually, Kevin came up with it because his father said to him, if you don't do this, there'll be hell to pay. And he said he always imagined that it was a toupee. with a life of its own, which was much easier than having hell to pay. But so it was about a toupee that went around killing people. And they do it on The Simpsons, and they do it they show it all the time on Halloween. And that pisses me off, because I think that somebody saw it. It was that, and then there was a Seinfeld episode of that is the beginning of Sheila Levine. Sheila Levine opens with a girl who's like really offended over the fact of somebody lying about calories in a diet milkshake. And that ended up on Seinfeld. Now, I know that there are ideas that people think of at the same time. It happens all the time because it's in the air. There's something that's very topical, or there's some trend. But those are very specific. And I'm glad I got to say it. Thank you.
You're welcome. In 1989, you joined the writing staff of the Golden Girls. So how did that come about?
You know, again, this is something I had never done before. I had written, very few episodes of half hours. My agent said that they needed a woman. There were 12 writers on that show when I was there. I've never been this popular.
Okay.
So
being hired on the Golden Girls and this writing staff is what we were talking about.
I think they needed a woman because they were losing, I think, a couple of the women that they had the first 3 years. So this was the 4th year of the show. And there were 12 writers and 11 men and me writing the Golden Girls. But when people say to me, how could that happen, I say to them, well, I write men, and we had a 28-year-old writer, Mitch Horowitz, who wrote the best menopause joke I've ever heard. It was, I think, Blanche said, I'm getting my little friend, or something like that. And Dorothy said, you haven't had your little friend in years. And somebody else said, well, Dorothy continued, isn't it amazing that women who live in the same house get on the same cycle? Now, this is from a 28-year-old male. So the men were really good. Really good. I mean, there was not a problem, somebody not understanding, what women would say. But people are always shocked that was the way the staff was. Now, I want to say something about the perks of being the only woman around. And that is that it's dirty. Before you get what's on the screen, you write a much filthier version of it. And it's fun. And it's so politically incorrect as far as it being, filthy, and as far as putting women down, putting everybody down. There was one writer who would say, I can't think of an idea unless I'm lying on top of Gail, and I would just lie down and he'd lie on top of me. And it was, it's part of being on the staff, and part of, nobody was uncomfortable. I enjoyed it. They enjoyed it. So the original fears in the end of the 60s of a woman being on the staff and, interrupting the writing room, there shouldn't have been a fear at all. But Golden Girls, because it was kind of, it was all below the waist humor on screen. So you can imagine how we got there. Whatever joke that you saw on screen was 10 times filthier when it first started. It was great.
Was it a challenge to come into an established show and sort of pick up the style and the tone of the characters?
Again, it's like having the ear to listen to what the characters are like. And it is challenging, and it's especially we had an all new staff, and I think everybody was quite nervous, including the actresses, and how it I keep saying like a Valley girl, but they would naturally be worried that the quality wasn't going to stay the same, especially since everyone on the staff was new. It wasn't just me. And so it was challenging to get the right words out of the right, actress's mouth. But the characters were so well defined. And the first time we filmed, one of the writers turned to the other one and said, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. Those women were so good. Their timing was so good that it wasn't only the joke that was said, but it was looks they gave each other. And it was like so precise. And of course, comedy has to be precise. I said, we would argue over a the or an and their looks would be, nothing was sloppy about it. And that's what good comedy is. It was scary that maybe we weren't going to, keep the quality up, but we did. And that's really when I thought it's like being on a baseball team, because you go from show to show. You have different uniforms because we get show jackets. And you kind of know your position. And on a sitcom, there are different talents. I mean, one is coming up with a premise. Another is doing an outline. Breaking the story is what we say. And the third is writing a draft. Another one is writing a second draft from notes. And then it's the table. And that is pitching jokes and punching up scripts. So some people are stronger at some things, and some people are stronger at other things, and somehow their reputations get around. I'm sure the same thing is going on today, that some writers are stronger in one thing or another. And that's how they get chosen, to fit onto a team. And we worked very well together.
What was your strength?
All of them. I'm not kidding. So I was really not bad at all of them.
What was your role on the show?
A little less than the table, although I had really hot days.
What was your role on the show when you started, and how did it evolve?
When I started, I was a supervising producer. Again, you get the producer's title, and there's a reason for that, and that's the Emmy. And that is that when the show is nominated, as well as your episode, but if the show is nominated and the show wins, then you get to participate in the awards. It's not only the Emmy, but the Writers Guild Award and things like that. So I started as supervising producer, but I rose I rose to executive producer, I guess, by the third year I was there. So I had never been on the staff of a half hour, but you pick it up. I mean, you pick it up because I had written half hours, and I knew what it was. I didn't even know what the schedule was like. That you do the table read, and that there's 1 million people there, including the network and the studio, which was Disney, and that you go back and fix the script, and that there are late nights till 2 and 3 in the morning sometimes. Sometimes we're there all night. And you get very giddy. and it gets to be more, everybody's like has their shoes off, their pants on. Whatever habits anybody has that are really bad, they're 10 times worse when you're doing a show. So if you're a drunk, not that anybody was, but you would be a total alcoholic if you were working on a show. If you did drugs, it would be, everything was like you smoked more, you ate more, shows are fattening. They're really fattening. And it's, you know, by the end of the season, I would have gained like about 12 pounds easily. But I would lose it easily over the summer also.
Talk about writing for each of the actresses and their characters. Let's start with B. Arthur as Dorothy Zbornak.
The characters were very, very well defined. And she was square in many ways. I mean, you know, she wasn't the one that dated a lot or, you know, went out a lot. And she was, you know, rule-oriented, and her humor came from that, you know, and it came from, she was a teacher, she was a substitute teacher in this, and it came from the fact that that's what she was. Now, she was, you know, the smart one, really, and, you know, a lot of, so Dorothy.
So we were talking about Dorothy.
Dorothy was a teacher, and the wonderful thing about her and her mother was that she was so tall and her mother was so small. And so just visually, it was funny. And if you notice, there's no physical humor on that show. It's really, they sat around a table in the middle of the night and talked. And, you know, they were, I thought of them as older, but now that I think back on it, they weren't that old. But they bounced off each other so easily. Dorothy was the one that she never dated, and she was divorced, and she had an ex-husband who was a pain in the ass. And every single one of those things is a comedy well. I learned a whole new vocabulary on this show. One is hang a lantern on it. I mean, not a vocabulary, but expressions, which is, you know, if you really have exposition and you have to get it out, then show the audience that it's obvious that you know that you're getting it out in an awkward way. All those little things that are sitcom expressions. But anyway, so that's Dorothy.
Talk about Betty White as Rhodes Island.
Well, you know, Betty White and Rue had different roles when they did the pilot. I wasn't there, but I heard this. And the director realized that they should be switched. And of course, now that you look at it, you think, well, it's so perfect. Why weren't they cast like that in the first place? But so that character, we were told so many times, she's not dumb, she's naive. But of course, there were like a million dumb jokes. I mean, you know, there was another well that we dipped into. That and the fact that she grew up, you know, in the smallest town, and they were crazy, and they raised cheese, and they, you know, she had so many stories about her hometown, and Dorothy used to roll her eyes. So we were able to do those stories, and that, you know, that was already done before I got there. But it was a place to go, and a place to, you know, where you could find humor. It was great.
Talk about Rue McClanahan as Blanche Devereaux.
She's a great character. I mean, one of the best lines, I think, ever written for that show. and it wasn't mine, was when Sophia, the mother, called Blanche a human mattress. It's exactly what it was. Now, we knew that she was not the slut that she herself portrayed herself to be. I mean, we knew that part of it was exaggerated on her part, which makes it, a much more subtle character than it really, you would think at first. But again, I mean, it's what pool do you dip into there? It was always these slut jokes, and how many men, and the crew is in, and go down to the docks. There are sailors waiting. I mean, it was just when I say that we got filthy, it was mainly through Blanche. And I mean, the jokes that got on air were not the original jokes. It was like just a funny version of those jokes, but a bit watered down.
And talk about Estelle Getty as Sophia.
Estelle was, her character was that she had no control over her mouth. So that she said everything she wanted to say, and she said it loud, and she said it clearly, and she didn't have to worry about it. But she was a funny, like kid-like in a way, who was always in a little bit of trouble. But because of her size and because of what she said, it was just funny to begin with. She was carb loading, or she was, whatever she was doing at the moment. She always wanted, like, to get Dorothy to buy her a big, huge TV. And it was, it was fun. I mean, I think there was one episode where she had been getting, like, a lot of Social Security checks. And she said she got naked and rolled around in the money. And yeah, that's what she did off stage. Absolutely. Again, her character was very pure. She had been rescued from this old age home, but she was always being, they were always threatening. Dorothy was always threatening to put her back there. So the premises for the shows had to be new and different, but their characters were so well set. Susan Harris.
Talk about working with Susan.
She wasn't there.
Oh, okay.
But I knew her. And I had done Mary Hartman, and she had done Soap. And we just knew each other as gal writers growing up. And it was so clearly defined that show, again, not only do people tell me that it helped their mothers, when they didn't feel well, and to extend that, when people have said, my mother was dying and the only pleasure she had was Golden Girls. But they have memories of watching it when they were young. And now people are watching it in college. That's all they're doing. But that's another whole problem. And we're not here to discuss that, the educational system.
How did you find the balance between writing for the four women and including them in each story?
Well, we did, like, again, in sitcom, there were A stories and B stories and C stories and D stories. And in this case, you had to have a pretty good balance. If somebody was the star of one episode, they were probably not going to be the star of the next one, but they'd be supporting, and they would have their own story, and they would have... It was a lot of weaving, and those scripts are not very long. and you're getting a lot into them, and a lot is because it's all sort of suggestion. I mean, I wrote 11 of them, and it was each time I thought I can't do this. I'm not good enough. I'll never do it right. I'll never, but good stuff.
You said that before air, the scripts were pretty filthy, and then you'd water them down a little. So where was that boundary? How did you know how far you could push it?
I shouldn't have said watered down, because that sounds like a negative. Cleaned up would have been nicer than watered down. We knew, and we got away with much more than other shows at the time, because they were older women, and maybe they weren't really telling the truth, like I said with Blanche. And so we were very rarely asked to take something out. I mean, you know not to use certain language. You know it. It's in your blood by that time. And as far as, we really did push the envelope in trying to make it as sexy as possible. I mean, I wrote one where Sophia wanted to have sex one more time. I think it was with Cesar Romero. And what I loved is that she, you see her in bed afterward, and she has a nightgown on. And she always carried that little purse, so, I think she was in a flannel nightgown. And she tells him that she loves him. But and he doesn't say anything. But just the idea that you can say, well, I want to have sex one more time, was, it was a sexy show. Girls, I love, by the way. I love watching girls. But, and I love the rawness of it and stuff. But we were doing an older version. And again, they have well-defined characters. We had well-defined characters.
Did you have a favorite character to write for?
No. No. I wrote the show where she was going to get married. Dorothy was going to get married. And as I was pitching it to Tony, the producers, they didn't know how I was going to get out of it, because Dorothy was going to get married and leave the series, and I think we had Debbie Reynolds, auditioning for the, to come in and be the other roommate and all of that. So we built it up to the very end, and he really, said to me, Paul Witt and Tony Thomas, how are you going to get out of it? And I knew that her ex-husband, who she was marrying, who I think she had paid alimony to, was now successful and going to ask for a prenup. And I knew it, and they didn't. And that was fun, because you really did paint yourself into a corner. You can never, people would come in from the outside and pitch shows to us, because there were a certain amount of shows that you gave to writers who weren't on the staff. And so many people would pitch what we called the Bop on the Head show, which was that one of them got hurt and changed her personality. Now, we're talking about how these characters are so true and so real, and they act, the same way in all different situations, that we never bought those scripts, or we never bought those premises. They didn't write the whole script, but because you never do change a character, even for one episode on a show like that. They're too good.
You say that everything you write comes from something that's personal to you. Do you remember any specific episodes or scenes that might have come from your own life?
there was one thing that actually came from one of my novels, and it was something that I thought of doing. I was single at the time, and I thought, why don't I put an ad in and say that I'm selling a Mercedes, an expensive car, and see who shows up for it. And if a woman, calls, I would say that the car is sold. And if a man calls, no, I didn't go through with it, but those are the thoughts that end up on pages that that did come from me. So that's one example, but it happens all the time.
Do you have a favorite episode?
I think it was Dorothy's wedding. I really do, because it was fun. It was a surprise. It was big, and for what do they call it? Actually, when the ratings weeks, you really, when ratings really counted, you did the bigger shows, which had to do with weddings, deaths, births, or really bad sickness. No, but mainly the happy things. And so that was one of them, and it was a two-parter. So I just loved it. As a matter of fact, I've always said to them that it could be a musical, because it starts with her husband getting rich, and it ends up with her not marrying him again. And there were 10 episodes, I think, that, we finally had an arc. Other shows, do an arc for the season. We never did. But in that little sort of, those episodes we did.
The show was nominated for several Emmys, so how did that feel to be nominated for this show?
It was great. And, fortunately or unfortunately, I've been married 4 times. So I was with my gynecologist husband, and it was sort of nice to bring them. It was always exciting to happen. Their Emmy winning time was mainly in their first 4 years, but it's still, I have a lot of nominations, and I'm happy about them all. I was telling my doctor yesterday, so I got this little piece of glass in my eye, and I went to an eye doctor. I didn't even know it was glass, so nobody vomit. But, and he took it out in a second, and it was just irritating me. And I was telling him about doing this today, and to not really mess up my eye, and to, don't push hard. And I said something like, he said, did you win any Emmys? I said 2, but I had like 17 nominations. And he said, 70? I thought, oh my God, here I was, like bragging about this huge number. And he's like saying 70? And that made sense to him. I don't think there's a living person who's had that.
Why did the show come to an end?
Arthur didn't want to do it anymore. And so they weren't going to do it without her. And then they did that horrible, what was it? I don't even remember what it was called. It was like Golden Palace. Golden Palace. It was nobody's fault, but it just didn't work. I mean, again, sometimes the sequel just doesn't work.
What was the legacy of the Golden Girls?
The Golden Girls, it's been a long time since that was on the air. And it's still, everybody knows it and everybody's heard of it. And once I was on a cruise with my husband, the 4th one, and the best one. And I don't know, he brags about it. You know, he says she did the Golden Girls, and he's very proud. And the woman said, oh, I never heard of it. And I knew she was lying. I knew she was lying. It's not possible. This is an American. This is somebody who was living at the time, you know, and an age-appropriate person. And you know what? 2 days later, she said, I told my daughter you wrote for the Golden Girls, and you know, we're both very impressed. I knew she was lying. It's almost like impossible to be living and breathing and not know. My grandchildren, that's another story. Actually, some of them have heard of it.
In 1987, you co-created the TV series Babes. So how did that come about?
That was one of these overall deals. I mean, you know, I had overall deals at Universal, but this was okay, we're going to just pay you to come up with something. And, well, you know, I feel like I'm always an overweight woman, so, and this big, beautiful women, there was a new magazine, I think, called BBW. So again, off the pages, you know, if I get enough subscriptions, I should get more subscriptions. I could probably come up with more stuff. But the fact that this magazine existed, and again, you kind of know that things are around, and you know, it's like the right time. So I had this deal, and this was the idea that I came up with, and they liked it. And it should have worked. Now, I was on Golden Girls at the time, so again, I was not on the staff, and I couldn't get out of Golden Girls. Not that I really wanted to, but all of a sudden, there it was on the air. As a matter of fact, my agent called me and said, you're on the air. This was after, you know, they had just chosen the schedule, so it was like a Sunday night. And I had done a lot of talk shows during that period of time. So I started switching channels and saying, where? And he said, no, your show. So it should have worked. I mean, I thought that the premise was good, and it had an unbelievable time slot. It was after The Simpsons. It had an unbelievable lead-in. But it just didn't work. I think too many fat jokes.
Yeah. Do you think that's why it wasn't successful?
I think so. Instead of, you know, varying it, I do.
So, and then in 1996, you began working on Tracy Takes On with Tracy Ullman. So how did that come about?
Ian and Dick. So it's Dick Clements and Ian Leffernet. I think I had met them, or just Ian, or he mentioned me to Tracy. And they brought me in. And 4 years I did that. And it was, you know, it was like the opposite of my early days. You know, here I was doing another variety show many years later. And this time it was, you know, forget mentioning the word nipples, you know, show nipples. It was like anything goes. It was like, can we put her in blackface? Yeah, put her in blackface. Can you really say that? Yes, say it. HBO is, the reason HBO is successful is that they don't interfere. Big news, you know? And they didn't. And I when I started, I tried to write some of the British characters that she had done before, which I was not good at. I eventually got into it a little, but once and Fern was a Jewish woman who lived in Florida. That was going to be a natural for me. And again, I know I used a lot of my life. One of the best lines was, I think my friend Rhea first mentioned this to me, which was, every time Michael Jackson gets sick, he goes straight to Cedars-Sinai, because we did a show about blacks and whites. And this was Fern, who was the Jewish woman. You want to know about blacks and Jews? I'll tell you about blacks and Jews. Every time Michael Jackson gets sick, he goes straight to Cedars-Sinai. And when we won the Emmy, that was the line that they showed, as representative of the show. So I was very proud. And Rhea Cohan, Buzz Cohan's wife. Genji Cohan and David Cohan. And there's another kid, John O'Cohan's mother. My best friend.
So describe the premise of that show for people who haven't seen it.
It was called Tracy Takes On, and we did a different subject, and this was her concept. We did a different subject every week. So she took on blacks and whites, she took on the medical profession, she took on politics, whatever the hour was going to be about was what she did. Now, one of the advantages was we only did 10. I think one year we did 13 or 15. But it was, and all the scripts, which is not the way I had ever worked before, were written before filming started. And she was another person. She said, if it's good and I like it, I'm not going to change it. Because once you start changing things and really going off on things and really making big changes in scripts, they lose something. They may gain something at the moment, but they can also lose something. So we wrote all the scripts before it was filmed every year. And just to show you how spoiled writers can be, we went away before we started every season to Santa Barbara and pitched ideas on what the shows should be, what the topics would be. And maybe even some of, because we would hear the topics, maybe there would even be, an idea and whatever that we pitched along with that. And we got a lot of, in those, like 3 or 4 days, we got a lot done because we were together all the time. And Genji Cohan was on that show, and I had worked with her father on Carol Burnett. So I really felt that I spanned something. And when Carol and Tracy did Once Upon a Mattress, I really thought they did it for me. So just to complete the circle.
Excellent. We're going to stop there and change